Yeah, that pretty much sums up how I'm feeling after watching the debut episodes of the Sex and the City revival show, and just like that. So let's unpack this, shall we? I want to begin by saying I grew up on Sex and the City. I was watching this show long before I probably should have been, but whatever, I turned out fine. I learned a lot from it, both good and bad, and would still highly recommend it as one of the most rewatchable background shows when I simply can't figure out what to watch. Yeah, I knew it was a glamorized portrayal of 20s and 30-something-year-old women living in a romanticized version of New York City, but looking past the glitzy clothes and unrealistic apartments, it was about a group of women coming into their own in search of themselves, their careers, friendships, and love. I bet most millennial and Gen X women who were lucky enough to have access to the show have fond memories of getting together with friends to rewatch their favorite episodes, debate about who of the friend group was most like the four characters, and dissect their favorite relationships, outfits, and funny moments from the show.
Fuck me hard.
Oh my god, she's fashion roadkill.
Yes, there are things about it that haven't aged well, but anyone with half a brain can still enjoy it for what it was, while being very well aware of the shortcomings regarding economic and racial representation. I'm only going to point this out for context, but no, I'm not white, and I didn't care that they were. Just like I didn't care that all the women in Living Single were black. Awesome show, by the way. If you've never heard of it, I highly recommend you checking it out. I don't believe one needs to look exactly like the characters of a story to identify with them. Good writing and characterization transcends all of that, and something about Sex and the City was so magically aspirational and hopeful that it made you want to be a part of their world, even if you knew deep down it wasn't real. Airing from 1998 to 2004, Sex and the City was unlike anything that had come before it. Adapted by Darren Star from the collection of essays by Candice Bushnell based on her and her friends' lifestyles, the show found a way to talk about women's issues with sex and love in a way that truly was groundbreaking for its time. It was smart, witty, funny, and didn't shy away from touching on subjects that make it one of those shows still on my do not watch with my parents in the room list. Plus, it set a new standard for how fashion could be used to enhance the characters, and it is a great example of how to tell a story through good costuming. At the heart of it were its four central characters, Carrie, Miranda, Charlotte, and Samantha. We saw them grow from girls to women, fall in and out of love, and ultimately get an ending fitting for who they were at their characters' cores. But we live in an age where Hollywood refuses to let beloved classics remain just that, classics. They have to trot them out like majestic racing horses pulled out of retirement for one, or in some cases several more turns around the old racetrack, just so audiences can watch as this once beautiful creature huffs and puffs their way down the lanes, the life slowly draining out of them until they finally keel over mere inches away from the finish line, and with that last precious breath, they throw up and shit themselves before slipping into oblivion. Their once shining legacy tarnished by the all-too-familiar stench and excrement of modern-age reboot mediocrity.
Make an original? Why would I do that when I can make a sequel?
Sequel.
IPs and sequels. That is the thing that people want.
Fortunately, though, we still have the memories of what they once were. And speaking of the glory days, let's take a brief look back at where our characters were when we last saw them. Sex columnist Carrie Bradshaw, played by Sarah Jessica Parker, was propped up as the main character, but it's safe to say that most of the fandom would end up regarding her as the least likable of the four. Not that this was a bad thing necessarily. Carrie was one of those love-to-hate characters for me. Her horribly selfish behavior and misguided choices pissed me off most of the time, but I'm glad they made her that flawed. All the women had their positive and negative attributes, which made them appear more real. Because just in case you didn't know, well, women were kinda complicated. Carrie would end the original run of the show finally bagging that big love, and yet we all cheered despite how problematic that relationship had been the whole time. Corporate lawyer Miranda Hobbs, played by Cynthia Nixon, was the most practical and level-headed of the bunch. She acted as the voice of reason most of the time, with a touch of perfectly timed cynicism and sarcasm mixed in. She didn't pull any punches when it came to slapping some sense into the other characters when they needed it. Her sense of style improved over time, but man, those early seasons, they were a bit rough for her in the wardrobe and hair department. She'd find herself settled down with bar owner Steve and son Brady in Brooklyn by the end of the show. The changeover from showrunner Darren Star to Michael Patrick King, now in charge beginning in the first movie, was most obvious when it came to this character. Museum docent turned stay-at-home mom, Charlotte York Goldenblatt, played by Kristen Davis, was the ultimate hopeless romantic. In any other show, this privileged Park Avenue waspy overachieving princess would probably come off as the most unlikable of the group, but they were able to give her redeeming characteristics like her kindness and optimism that made her truly endearing. Charlotte's journey would see her married to a Prince Charming who, surprise surprise, didn't end up being so perfect after all, as impotence was never on the Disney Prince menu. She struggled with infertility, got divorced, fell in love with her divorce lawyer, converted to Judaism, and was blessed with an adopted girl from China by the end of the show. Plus, she got a surprise natural pregnancy in the first movie, so things were turning out pretty well for Charlotte the last we saw her. Independent PR businesswoman Samantha Jones, played by Kim Cattrall, rounded out the fabulous foursome. She was the oldest, funniest, most sexually confident, most outspoken, and was the ultimate fixer. Long before terms like pansexual were a thing, she was a self-proclaimed trisexual, as in she'd try anything once. Out of the 3 longest relationships she had on the series, one of them was even a woman of color, and it wasn't made to be a big deal. By the show's end, we'd see her develop into a recovering breast cancer survivor, now in a long-term relationship with model-turned-actor Smith Jerrod, eventually living in LA during the first movie, but ultimately choosing her own happiness and returning to independent single life in New York by the second film. The end of the show couldn't have been done any better, with our 4 leading ladies strutting their stuff down the streets of New York in solidarity, and the emphasis put on the love they found in friendship with one another being as important, if not more so, than the love they found with their romantic partners. I think most would agree that the 2 movies that followed were completely unnecessary, and with the new director and head writer at the helm, Michael Patrick King, the changes in tone and overall direction of the characters were not welcomed by most. The character assassination done to Steve with him cheating on Miranda in the first film is what did it for me. And we had already seen Carrie and Big go through this will they won't they thing throughout the whole show. What was the point in making us have to sit through him not showing up for their wedding in the movie just to stall for time? And then they turn her into a cheater in the second film with her kissing Aiden in Abu Dhabi, which it just, at that point, I mean, come on, we're already sick of this. You didn't have to do that. Samantha's ridiculous, culturally insensitive tirade on the streets of Abu Dhabi in the second film didn't match the character at all. Like, I get it, she's always been a horn dog, but she's also a smart, successful PR woman. There's no way in hell she'd be that much of a clown. I know there's been a lot of talk from the likes of Sarah Jessica Parker and Michael Patrick King about ageism and misogyny surrounding the reboot show, but if you go back and pay attention to the second movie, you can already see how little respect and understanding Michael Patrick King has for depicting aging women. I think Lindy West said it best in her scathing and hilarious review of the second film when she said it was essentially a home video of a gay man playing with giant Barbie dolls. And then there's Charlotte, who is just there to struggle with life as a mother and make culturally insensitive, borderline racist remarks in the first film.
You're just gonna eat that pudding crap for the entire trip?
It's the only thing in the pantry that's totally safe. See? Made in Poughkeepsie. I didn't want to chance it.
It's a 5-star resort.
It's Mexico.
And be used as comic relief in the second.
Oh. Wow, you have an actual camel toe.
She's having a little sand wedge.
I can't tell you how much I hated that scene in Mexico in the first one. So you show her perpetuating an outdated and harmful stereotype of being afraid to eat anything in a Latin American country, to then prove her right when she ends up getting sick by ingesting the water for half a second while showering. Good job, guys. Like, seriously, I should have known it was going to be all downhill from there. And to their credit, though, the first film has some good moments.
I am not the type of woman who sits home all day waiting for a man!
Especially with the incorporation of Jennifer Hudson's character, but the second is a dumpster fire of bad jokes, bad outfits, and cringeworthy takes on Middle Eastern culture.
Hey, what's the holdup? We got a lot of Abu Dhabi to do. Abu Dhabi do!
And with all that, you'd think they'd learn their lesson, but oh no, they gotta come back for more, and props to Kim Cattrall, she had enough. Even if she agreed to come back, I doubt she could have saved this. All the speculation and media attention surrounding the supposed feud between her and Sarah Jessica Parker has been completely unnecessary and perpetuates the harmful rhetoric we see time and time again from the media trying to push a self-serving narrative for clicks and views that pits women against each other. Like, seriously, is it really so hard to believe that she's just done? People are allowed to move on, and newsflash, you're not always best friends with people you work with. And even if she were close with them at the time, after you leave a job, it's easy to fall out of touch with people.
December 2016, I said no. The other girls are 10 years younger than me, and that is their choice. I wish them the best. I'll be the one in the audience cheering them on.
Now I get the point when I can hear some asking, if you hate the last couple outings, then why would you even try to watch the new series? Well, totally fair question, and because, well, I'm an emotional cutter. No, seriously, because like the original Charlotte, I'm a hopeless romantic and an optimist. I bet most are when it comes to seeing once beloved stories get adapted into something new. That's how they get us. I mean, they want to play into that nostalgia and hope that gets us to watch, but that just compels me to speak out even more with every passing disappointment. It's rare to get this right. Ever since I heard they were going to do a new show, I hoped for the best but expected the worst. You never know, maybe it would end up being one of those rare reboots that sticks the landing, like Cobra Kai. But no, it ain't. If the first 2 episodes are any indication, this show will turn out to be less like a triumphant showing at Fashion Week and more like a rummage through a 75% off bargain bin sale at your local secondhand store that leaves you empty-handed, wondering where that weird rash came from the next day. But let's see how these 2 episodes fared, shall we? And I'm not going to hold back from spoilers since I don't care enough about the show not to. So, you've been warned. Episode 1 opens up in a post-COVID NYC with the now trio waiting for reservations at some no-name bougie restaurant. No setup, no signature Carrie narration. The only voiceover we're going to get from her is a line at the end of each episode with a tagline, and just like that. It feels off from the start. We get a taste of what will become a similar pattern in both episodes of a way of delivering exposition to the audience while attempting to be funny, and it's through awkwardly over-the-top run-ins with people they haven't seen for a while. I thought I was going to get a show about an empowering representation of maturing women, but every older woman they come into contact with is a laughable clown. Except for women of color, of course, but we'll get to that. We don't get 10 minutes in without getting a nod to modern-day politics, a la Carrie's absentee voting sticker on her phone. I get it, people evolve, but Carrie never cared about politics. And if you want proof, go back to watch the Pee on Me politician episode. Charlotte berates Miranda for her gray hair, and her comeback is a soapbox speech about how she's going back to school to get a degree in human rights. Carrie is snapping Insta-reels of strangers without their consent, and is off to her podcast job, while Charlotte pressures the others to come to her daughter Lily's piano recital like the girl is 10 years old. So now Carrie is a former sex columnist who apparently just discovered masturbation. I would have assumed she'd be the host, not just an employee. It would have been way more believable that way. It could have easily been called the Sex and the City podcast, and they could have paired her with younger, more PC hosts who challenge her older ways of thinking. You could even work in a plotline of her facing cultural cancellation for something in one of her past columns, but no, we get the 2 most obnoxious PC characters as her co-hosts.
Representing the cisgender women is Carrie Bradshaw. And representing the cishet men is the dude himself, Jackie Nee. Your host and queer, non-binary, Mexican-Irish diva representing everyone else outside these 2 boring genders.
Complete with a literal woke moment button.
Woke moment!
Are you okay?
I'm fine. I just threw up in my mouth a little bit.
I get they're supposed to be stand-up comics, so I think what they're saying about public masturbation is satire, but the conversation almost plays like they were being completely serious. And I don't care what your political leanings are, in no world is that okay. In no world should that be presented as being sex positive.
That's disgusting.
And moving on, Bobby Lee, I'm disappointed in you for taking this job. And going back to Carrie, they shame her for being a prudish, cisgendered, hetero married lady who isn't dialoguing with her super progressive co-hosts, who, by the way, it's not polite to light up wherever you want, especially not in an elevator. Oh, and don't think I didn't notice how the camera kept cutting to the hot guy in the producer booth. By now, you might be asking yourself, hey, what about that Mr. Big? Well...
John! Oh, God. Oh, God, John.
He did. To be fair, he doesn't start out that way, but personally, I don't mind them killing him off as they need a plot device to keep the show going after all. The scenes with him were boring anyways. I mean, what's with him instructing Carrie how to season a fish like that? Is this their first date? I mean, these 2 have been together on and off for over 20 years, and it's like they don't even know each other. What a way to go out, though. I mean, poor Peloton took a hit in all of this, but come on, Big waited for you to get home just for you to go into shock and not call 911? I mean, what the hell, Carrie? In a recent interview with the showrunner, he justifies this by saying the moment is slowed down, so it stretched what would have actually been a split second for Carrie to a longer moment so we all feel the pain. Well, obviously it wasn't done properly because judging from the reaction on social media, it did not come across that way to most of the audience. Episode 2 revolves mostly around the most awkward funeral ever and Charlotte's inability to stop crying over how guilty she feels at the thought of Carrie being mad at her for insisting she come to Lily's recital instead of being with Big that night. Everything is so incredibly awkward. And speaking of Charlotte, she's of course a mother and is now an insufferable nag. Harry is an afterthought, but at least they're still allowed to depict them as having a happy marriage and him a good husband, at least for now. Lily is the perfect Asian daughter, and seriously, why does the adopted Chinese daughter have to be a piano prodigy? Isn't it a weird stereotype to hold on to in a show that clearly thinks it's being progressive? She's also still ruining Carrie's life, so go Lily. Rose is the daughter who doesn't want to wear a dress, and I swear if they turn this into some LGBTQ scenario, whatever, it's fine. It might even be interesting seeing Charlotte have to wrestle with having a queer daughter, but it's perfectly fine for a young girl to just be a tomboy without having to be gay. Charlotte's new POC sidekick is Lisa Todd Wexley, and she's just so cool. The second Charlotte started gushing about this new person in episode 1, I knew it was going to be a woman of color. I legit screamed out loud when they proved me right. She's a documentarian and a humanitarian, International Vogue Best Dressed List, all yada yada yada, which is all code for awesome black lady I'm trying to befriend for progressive points. Seriously, it's like Oprah handing out new cars. You get a POC friend, and you get a POC friend, and you get a POC friend. This is not the right way to interject diversity into a story. We get that you're trying to atone for the sins of the past, but how about just doing it naturally like when they brought in Jennifer Hudson's character in the first movie? No one ever had to mention her race, unlike this show where they're just so crass and tokenizing about everything. It's clear that the three main women are all going to be learning valuable lessons from their POC counterparts, which continues to play out a trend of having POC characters solely exist to teach white characters a thing or two.
Here, give that to Black Charlotte.
Miranda is now a burgeoning alcoholic who doesn't know how to act around black people. No doubt her issues with alcohol will be a running plot thread, but I hate to see her character go down this road. For some reason, she's against podcasts, which doesn't seem to be in character when Miranda was always the one on the cusp of adopting the latest tech in the show. Carrie was always the one who didn't know what she was doing in that department, but whatever. How about instead you make Miranda a law professor who needs to learn the finer things of modern-day politics and social ideology from her students? That would have been way more believable for me. But now she's the poster child for a white, ignorant boomer turned aspiring social justice warrior who can't stop spouting microaggressions at her black law professor. Seriously, I had to pause every scene with these two as I was overcome with extreme secondhand embarrassment.
That's where the professor sits. Sorry, he just told me.
Someone's quick with the pronouns.
It's fine. I am the professor. Why do you seem so surprised?
Well, your braids.
A law professor can't have hair like mine?
The braids are so different than the hair in your photo on the Columbia website. My comment had nothing whatsoever to do with it being a black hairstyle.
You signed up for this class because I'm black?
Well, not just because you're black.
I'm not questioning her identity. I'm waiting for her to show me her ID.
Well, it's interesting because you barely glanced at mine when I went through.
Here it is.
Thank you. Come on through, Professor Wallace.
Did you have to say something?
One of the important takeaways I got from how to be an anti-racist is if you see something, you have to speak on it. You have to call it out.
But the reality is you just inflamed a situation that was perfectly fine. He needed to see my ID. It was somewhere in my bag.
The same thing when Carrie asked Big to pleasure himself in front of her while she crouched there on the side of the bed like a gargoyle, even though the assignment was clearly for her to do it. That brings me to another good Miranda point for 17-year-old Brady. You gotta love that the only two intimate scenes in the first 2 episodes had nothing to do with the main female characters. Again, I thought this whole thing was supposed to show off how empowering it is to be a mature woman embracing their sexuality. I don't want to see Big do that, and I sure as hell don't want to see Miranda's 17-year-old son get down cowboy style with his girlfriend. I mean, ew, the whole time I was saying, make it stop, make it stop.
I don't want any of that.
No. What kind of parenting is this? Oh, and there's Steve, who apparently is an 80-year-old with hearing loss, even though he's only in his mid-50s. It's like, yes, keep on beating us over the head with how many times a character must mention how old they are. Real positive messaging you got there. And speaking of Samantha, where are you when we need you? Living the good life in London, apparently. Good for her. They try to explain her absence in a way that comes off as a direct dig to Kim Cattrall, saying her pride was hurt when Carrie dropped her as a publicist. So what? She uprooted her whole life and closed down her super successful New York business all because of Carrie? Please! What a load of BS. You could have just said she got a job offer in London during COVID and you haven't seen her since. They wrote Christina Yang's character out of Grey's Anatomy without having to make it about a feud between characters. It's very petty and immature of the showrunners and SJP to do it this way. Kim Cattrall was right to stay away, and her choice should be shown more respect than that. And finally, Stanford is a whiny bitch and Anthony is relatively the same. Making those two a couple was the laziest BS to come out of the two movies. They do not go well together, and it's a shame that the show apparently won't be addressing the real-life passing of Willie Garson, who died during production. Circling back to reports saying SJP and MPK have taken offense to people comparing this to the acclaimed classic Golden Girls, my final words to you are this.
Eat dirt and die, trash.
You wish you were the Golden Girls. It would be an honor to be compared to that show. Those ladies would be running circles around you. They were having far more sex and had a lot more interesting things to say about the realities of being an aging woman, while celebrating it at the same time. If you're looking for a movie that does this, I recommend It's Complicated, Something's Gotta Give, and Steel Magnolias, just to name a few of my favorites.
Ow! Sorry, Miss Weezer. Now, you take your Bible and shove it where the sun doesn't shine.
This is a lifeless, soulless husk of a program, one that needs to be shoved to the back of the closet like Carrie's jilted wedding dress. I don't see myself wanting to be anything like these women when I'm in my 50s, and if that's the future in store for me, I say don't even wait for the papers to be signed, just pull the plug now and send me on my way.
Whatever happened to fun? God, I'm so bored I could die.
It was the first time Lexi had ever left a party early.
And as for continuing watching the show, I may out of some morbid curiosity, but don't get your hopes up. No joke, this show has made me want to start watching The Golden Girls from beginning to end with my mom over the holidays. So, congratulations, Sarah Jessica Parker. You have proven that you indeed are no Golden Girl.